Hello everyone, boys and girls, those who bounce in between. It's Comrade Dankey, and in today's video I'm going to be giving a response to Vaush and his latest argument that Marx and Engels and Lenin would have supported Joe Biden, while at the same time offering my critique to the argument of voting blue no matter who, and discussing Kamala Harris as Joe Biden's pick for VP. So, let's start with Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is Joe Biden's pick for vice president. Now, out of all the people he could have picked, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, he chose the most pro-police candidate out there as his VP pick, as his running mate. And the tone-deaf DNC not only supported Joe Biden, the most unprogressive and reactionary candidate for president, but they also support Kamala Harris for his VP pick, the most pro-police candidate out there. This is during a time where we have national protests against police brutality and against systemic racism. You have the DNC picking someone who opposed desegregating schools, Joe Biden, and you also have them picking for his VP the most pro-police candidate out there, Kamala Harris. It's also worth noting that the stocks in private prisons shot way up when Kamala Harris was announced as Joe Biden's VP pick. So that should tell you everything you need to know about whether or not she is willing to challenge the establishment. There is not an atom in Kamala Harris's body which is sympathetic to the plight of people of color. There's not an atom in Kamala Harris's body which wants to limit or curtail the powers of the police, that wants to see an end to this current paradigm of police brutality and intimidation. Indeed, Biden has told his Wall Street donors that fundamentally nothing will change with him as the president. Despite all of this, you still have prominent breadtubers like Vaush and like Xanderthal coming out and continuing to support Biden. Not only do they do this, but they also, Vaush has egregiously claimed that several founding fathers of socialist thought, Marx, Engels, and Lenin, etc., would have supported Joe Biden. And in order to justify this outrageous claim, he opportunistically and selectively quotes theory. But before I get into the individual passages that Vaush brings up, I want to bring up something. When you read Lenin's Left Communism, an Infantile Disorder, he has a chapter on whether or not a communist party should participate in bourgeois electoralism. And he comes to the conclusion that you should only participate in bourgeois electoralism to platform communists. You don't use it to support bourgeois candidates like Biden. Vaush and Xanderthal both, they fail to understand that the passages they cite imply that there's a communist vanguard party participating in bourgeois electoralism, that we shouldn't just blindly support liberal candidates without a party organization of our own first, with which to challenge the mainstream neoliberal politics of the DNC. Vaush believes that Trump would destroy democracy in the USA. Newsflash for you, Vaush. Democracy's already dead in this country. We don't have a democracy here. The bourgeois control everything. They control the media. They control the politics. They control everything. Joe Biden is bourgeois, so supporting him accomplishes nothing. I repeat, nothing for the working class. Biden, during the time of a global pandemic, he doesn't even support Medicare for all. With 170,000 Americans dead, millions more crippled from this disease, Biden isn't fighting for a progressive agenda. And he won't. He would never fight for a progressive agenda. He assured Wall Street that fundamentally nothing would change. The fact that Vaush seems to think that Biden would fight for a progressive agenda is laughable. Anyone can selectively quote theory to support their radical liberalism, and Vaush has done so while not realizing that in order to even participate in bourgeois electoralism, the revolutionary sector of the working class needs to first organize into a vanguard party. This is inconvenient for him because this would involve him working with tankies, whom he regards to be just as bad as Nazis. But maybe Vaush and Zanderthal believe that individuals can lead the revolution. Now, if that were true, then where is the Breadtube revolution? They reject the need for a vanguard party on one hand, and on the other hand, they cite theory which believes in the necessity of a vanguard party. You can't have it both ways, Vaush. I know you can barely read as it is, but you can't expect me to believe that you didn't understand this basic fact. You willingly ignored the building blocks for bourgeois electoral participation, the building of a vanguard party of the working class. You ignored all of that, and then you tried to selectively quote theory to support a bourgeois candidate. Very, very revolutionary. Very leftist, dude. And so these are some of the passages that Vaush cites. Again, keep in mind that when I'm reading these passages, Engels and the like are talking about the need and the tactics for an already established revolutionary vanguard party. So this is the first. He says, virtually every leftist theorist advocates for participation in bourgeois electoralism to some degree. The first passage he cites says, we seek the abolition of classes. What is the means of achieving it? The political domination of the proletariat. Revolution is the supreme act of politics. Whoever wants it must also want the means, the political action which prepares for it, which gives the workers the education for revolution, and without which the workers are always duped. But the politics which are needed are working class politics. The Workers' Party must be constituted not as the tail of some bourgeois party, but as an independent party with its own objective, its own politics. So you see here in the passage that Vaush cites, it's advocating a need for working class politics. Joe Biden is not bringing you working class politics. Kamala Harris is not bringing you working class politics. And as far as the Democratic Party being a workers' party, that's absolutely laughable. The Democratic Party is a bourgeois party controlled exclusively by the interest of the bourgeois. There isn't a workers' bloc within the Democratic Party to even platform a socialist. So him citing these passages, this passage from Engels, as proof that Engels supported participating in bourgeois electoralism, ignores the massive 1,000-pound elephant in the room, that before you participate in bourgeois electoralism, you need to have organized a revolutionary vanguard party to do so. Vaush is against the organization of a revolutionary vanguard party. But let's read the second passage. It says, and if universal suffrage had not offered no other advantage than that it allowed us to count our numbers every 3 years, that by the regularly established unexpectedly rapid rise in our vote and increased in equal measure the workers' certainty of victory and the dismay of their opponents. And so it became our best means of propaganda, that it accurately informed us of our own strength and that of all opposing parties, and thereby provided us with a measure of proportion second to none for our actions, safeguarding us from the untimely timidity as much as from untimely foolhardiness. If this had been the only advantage we gained from the suffrage, it would have still been more than enough, but it did more than this by far. In election propaganda, it provided us with a means second to none of getting in touch with the mass of people where they still stand aloof from us, of forcing all parties to defend their views and actions against our attacks before all the people. And further, it provided our representatives in the Reichstag with a platform from which they could speak to their opponents in Parliament, and so to the masses outside with quite a different authority and freedom than in the press or at meetings. Once again, I want to drive this concept home. Joe Biden is not pro-worker. Joe Biden is not a socialist. Joe Biden is not arguing for communism. Joe Biden is a bourgeois candidate. And so it's all well and good that Vaush has done a little bit of reading and he's able to cite these passages here. But it's disappointing that he cites these passages clearly not understanding that before you even begin to participate in bourgeois parliamentarianism or in bourgeois politics in general, the working class needs to have organized into a revolutionary vanguard party with a party platform and the like. That these passages are talking about platforming communists alongside capitalists, alongside bourgeois candidates. It's not in any way implying that we need to support bourgeois candidates. You know, the same bourgeois candidates that say we should lock up the protesters. The same bourgeois candidate that says, even though 170,000 Americans have died, Medicare for all is still too radical. He cites Lenin wrote extensively on the British Labour Party, which he was not fond of. Now, again, I'll leave a link to this article in the description, where you can all look through it yourself and see how he selectively quotes theory and cites theory to support his backing of a bourgeois candidate for president. Now, he argues this from a harm prevention standpoint, that Joe Biden is better than Donald Trump. First of all, that has not been established. It hasn't been established that Joe Biden would be a better president than Donald Trump. It has not been established that Joe Biden would be more sympathetic to the workers in general, but more specifically to women. That's laughable considering that he has been accused of rape and how handsy he typically is with women in general. It's unrealistic to think that he would be remotely supportive of the LGBT community, of the black community, of people of color in general. And it's absolutely laughable to think that he will somehow stick up for students, that he'll somehow stick up for immigrants, that he'll somehow stick up for leftists and for women of color. It's absolutely laughable. But from a harm prevention standpoint, it has not been established that Joe Biden is the lesser of the two evils. Joe Biden, you know, if you compare policy by policy, Joe Biden may claim to support a progressive agenda. But when you get down to the nitty-gritty, when Joe Biden is in the White House, he will not support a progressive agenda in any way, shape, or form. We're talking about the same person who was essentially a shill for the credit card companies. We're talking about a person, once again, I've said this twice already, but in the midst of a global pandemic with 170,000 American deaths, he still says that Medicare for all is too radical. So with that, let me read my open letter to Breadtube. So it says this: Dear Breadtube, let me start by saying that you're not all bad. You have a large reach and widespread appeal because of creative quality content on a myriad of topics ranging from social issues and pop culture to systemic problems in our society, like issues of race or class or gender. In general, you serve to push liberals out of their capitalist bubble and get them exposed to ideas outside of the neoliberal corporate mind prison. I say that for the most part, but several of your key spokesmen of Breadtube, Vaush and Xanderthal, etc., shill for Joe Biden and say vote blue no matter who. And far too often, Breadtube, you allow the loudest voices in the room, voices like Vaush and Xanderthal and Bad Empanada, to slander fellow activists, fellow fighters in the struggle for the liberation of the working class as fascistic or authoritarian or genocidal. You refer to us as red tankies or red fascists. They equate the actions of brave comrades trying to organize and fight against capitalism as being akin to the actions of Nazis and other fascists. They claim that communists are irrelevant, that our vast body of knowledge and experience throughout the history of our struggle is somehow archaic and unable to apply to modern circumstances. I've heard Vaush say this. He dismisses theory because he believes it's archaic and it doesn't apply to our current circumstances. Breadtubers like Vaush and Xanderthal claim that we, the tankies, don't care about organizing, hilariously enough, and that communists only care about the aesthetics of the left. This is hypocrisy to an insane degree, considering how many Breadtube bros proudly call themselves Marxist or socialist or communists. They'll rock the hammer and sickle, they'll flaunt socialist aesthetics all day long, only to turn around and slander and argue against real socialists and communists. This is not what the movement needs right now. It's time to stop. It's time to stop slandering and attacking tankies, constantly calling us fascist authoritarians. How about you learn the difference between fascism and socialism before daring to refer to us as fascist? And you would clearly see how fascism and socialism are diametrically opposed. It's time to stop making bad faith arguments against communism using and citing far-right propaganda. Learn how to check your sources and maybe don't trust capitalist-funded media to give you a true and honest story. Maybe don't trust The Guardian, The New York Times, or The Washington Post. It's time to stop claiming that communists blindly idolize past socialist revolutionaries. Realize that communists are highly critical of Stalin and Mao and other aspects of socialism's history, and that a practice of self-criticism is central to a communist party. We don't blindly worship these figures and consider them to be, perfect in every aspect, but we understand that they were human. They were excellent contributors to the socialist movement, but they were flawed in certain areas too. No system is pristine. No revolutionary is perfect, and no revolution is perfect and without flaws. We live in a material world, not an idealist world. And so when a revolution comes about, expect there to be excesses. Expect there to be certain authoritarian elements. After all, Engels puts it brilliantly. There's nothing more authoritarian than a revolution. But going back to Breadtube, it's time to stop turning away people from reading theory. Marxism-Leninism is more relevant now than ever before, and anyone who reads theory will tell you you have to understand theory to understand the class dynamics at play to grasp the revolutionary situation. It's like someone trying to understand high-level astronomy or astrophysics, and they themselves have never used a telescope. They've never opened an astronomy textbook or consulted a chart of the stars. You have to understand, Breadtube, that the role of a vanguard has to play in the revolution. You have to stop accusing us of being elitist or sectarian and understand that a vanguard consists of the most theoretically knowledgeable and radical of revolutionary activists, and how it's necessary for the most advanced of these revolutionary activists to organize and to form a party. Which leads me to my main point. Organize, organize, organize. Join the Party of Communist USA. Join a union. Join your local Black Lives Matter protest group. And if none of these exist, then form your own group. Stop listening exclusively to these big YouTube personalities who do nothing but collect their Patreon bucks and stream on Twitch, and they bitch and whine about how evil tankies are. Listen to the people who are out there protesting and fighting against capitalist oppression. Spontaneity is not going to result in a revolution, and neither is tailing behind the masses. The only way forward is for the most radical and theoretically knowledgeable of activists to form an organization to lead the working class. This vanguard will consist of men, women, non-binary people, black, white, people of all different backgrounds and identities. And to oppose the organization of such a vanguard is to oppose the destruction of capitalism. Anyone who speaks out against tankies in such a perilous political environment needs to be universally mocked and ridiculed for attempting to divide the left in a time where we need organization. And so that's the end of my open letter to Breadtube, but I wanted to also talk about what I mean when I call someone a Radlib, because I've come under fire for calling Vaush a Radlib in the past, but I feel like it is the most appropriate description of what he is ideologically. A Radlib, or a radical liberal, is someone who teeters on the brink of being an actual leftist. They may still be learning or in the process of discovering their actual political identity. And so they're testing the waters. They're leaving the shallow pools of progressivism and social democracy, and they're dipping their toes in the waters of the left. And what happens is that they usually settle on anarchism. This happened to me, because anarchism has a semblance of being anti-capitalist and pro-revolutionary without having to dirty yourself by associating oneself with past or present socialist governments. It provides Western quote-unquote leftists a means by which to pretend to be radical socialists, fighting for the overthrow of capital, while in reality they unironically find themselves repeating anti-communist propaganda from the right wing. They can cloak themselves in socialist or communist symbolism and rhetoric while denouncing every single socialist revolution or movement in the past as being revisionist or state capitalist, red fascist or authoritarian, etc. They find themselves supporting color revolutions in Tibet, in Hong Kong, in Venezuela, and now in Belarus, all of which are funded and or supported by the bourgeois. They find themselves ranting more against supposedly how evil the tankies are instead of against the forces of capital or imperialism. And in doing so, they become reactionary forces against the People's Revolution. I call them radical liberals because they have refused to abandon their liberal idealism. They cling to petty bourgeois individualism and reject the need for a working class to organize a revolutionary vanguard party, all the while proclaiming to be radicals, proclaiming to be anti-capitalist, pro-socialist, and anti-imperialist. All the while, they parrot CIA and right-wing anti-communist propaganda, and they constantly smear tankies online to a mass audience. Radlibs are the defenders of capitalism, the enemies of socialism, and are purely opportunist and serve to divide and destroy the movement. They discourage organization and ultimately serve the forces of imperialism and capitalism, whether they do this intentionally or not. And that is my biggest critique of Vaush. People have asked me why I spend so much time talking about Vaush, harping on Vaush. It's not Vaush that I'm harping on, it's Vaush's ideas. It's Vaush's ideology that he's putting out, this radical liberalism that tells everyone to oppose tankies, to oppose communist regimes and governments across the world and movements across the world, while at the same time support these right-wing backed color revolutions. And how this person has opportunistically branded himself as a Marxist or as a socialist and continues to do nothing but slander actual Marxists and actual socialists online and misrepresent what communists actually believe. Vaush is not a leftist. He's a pseudo-leftist. He's a phony leftist. He's a leftist in disguise. He serves the forces of reaction. He serves the forces of capitalism. He serves the forces of imperialism. And as long as he exists on this platform and continues to put out his dipshit opinions, I will be here to challenge them. So, with all that said, Breadtube, it's time to get your shit together. There are national protests right now against police brutality and against systemic racism. It's time to pull your head out of your ass, out of your Radlib ass, and start getting boots on the ground, standing side by side with your comrades protesting against capitalist oppression. It's time to stop tweeting about how evil the tankies are. It's time to stop citing CIA propaganda. And it's time to familiarize yourself with the theory that you claim to understand. It's time to turn Vaush off and open up State and Revolution. Read and understand that book before you watch another video about this dipshit Radlib Vaush and his opinion. And if you by the end of reading that book, and if by the end of reading Left Communism and Infantile Disorder, you still believe that Marx, Engels, and Lenin would have voted for Joe Biden, I don't have any hope for you. But if you do your due diligence and do the reading, I would be more than happy to have a debate on you with that fact, because I universally reject that claim. Marx, Engels, and Lenin would have never voted for Joe Biden, and they would have called someone like Vaush a liberal opportunist for suggesting otherwise. All that is to say, unsubscribe from Vaush, don't listen to him, and if you want to really piss him off, send him this video. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.